All right, welcome everyone to the August North Sonoma Valley Municipal Advisory Council meeting. And welcome to everyone, council members and the public who are here and anyone else who's attending. So I'd like to call the meeting to order and lead everyone in the Pledge of Allegiance. And Hannah will have a flag. So join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
To the republic
For which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then I would like to follow that with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the citizens and communities served by the North Sonoma Valley Municipal Advisory Council occupy the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Miwok, who are closely related to neighboring indigenous peoples, the Pomo, the Wapo, and others. Asking forgiveness for past transgressions they and their ancestors experienced, we humbly invite them to join us in person or in spirit as we give gratitude for their ongoing stewardship of this place since time immemorial. Recognizing how much we benefit from their continuing presence as culture keepers and teachers, we commit ourselves to building positive and lasting relationships with our local indigenous community and to honor all the diverse peoples of our region. And just a couple of housekeeping things here. So we've turned off question and answer in chat for the meeting. When public comment is open, please use the raise hand function on Zoom to be recognized and promoted to speak. And if it appears that the meeting's been hacked at any time, we'll immediately close down the meeting and reschedule for a future date. Items number 7 and 8 have been removed from the agenda because the presenters are not available. So the Sonoma County Transit bike racks and benches and the SDC update from John McCall at the Land Trust. He wasn't able to make it. So those will be done at a future meeting. But we do have the one that we do have still is the Portrait of Sonoma County American Rescue Plan Act. And we'll have Oscar Chavez from the Human Services Department of the county. We'll be talking about that. And we should have Susan Gorin here in just a little bit.
Arthur?
Yeah.
Can I take roll?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I always forget that. Thank you.
Okay, Chair Dawson.
I am here.
Councilmember Eagles. Councilmember Newhouser. Councilmember Dickey.
Here.
Councilmember Nardo Morgan. Here. Councilmember Oldroyd. Here. Councilmember Cooper. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. Now, couple brief announcements. For those of you who have not been to a North Sonoma Valley Advisory Council meeting before, thank you for your participation and engagement and dedication to this community. We serve the communities of Kenwood and Glen Ellen, which includes the former Sonoma Developmental Center at Eldridge. And as the most local arm of county government, we represent people who live and work outside of incorporated cities like Sonoma or Santa Rosa. We are in many ways a country town council. Like other advisory councils in Sonoma County, we were established by the Board of Supervisors to act as a two-way communication channel. The MAC serves as our community voice at county government as a means for us to learn about and access county resources, and as a place to identify challenges and opportunities and innovate solutions in partnership with our supervisor. Our bylaws limit us to issues concerning transportation, health and human safety, community projects, and emergency preparedness, but others can be added at the request of our supervisor. There are no limitations on subject matter during the public comment section at the beginning of the meeting, which will be coming up in just a few minutes. And now Vice Chair Handren has an announcement about concerning what's happening on the SDC front.
So council members, Hannah will be sending an email to everybody in preparation for the August 24th meeting The basic idea is for council members to pick a particular topic in the EIR to review and prepare questions and comment for the meeting. So we'll be asking for people to sign up for various topics. Those topics include the wildlife corridor and open space, housing density and overview, adaptive reuse of existing buildings, cultural resources, historic preservation, utility infrastructure, fire and emergency preparedness, traffic, commercial space and job creation, and cumulative effects. So if people could be thinking about which area they want to prepare for, that would be great. And just a calendar of future meeting dates. On August 24th is the Triple MAC meeting with the North Sonoma Valley MAC and the Springs MAC. Is there another MAC?
The Citizens Advisory Council.
The Citizens Advisory Council.
Not exactly a MAC, but it's easier to say it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. On September 9th is the deadline for proposals under the state's RFP. And council member contributions to the MAC response letter will be due on that date. September 15th, the Planning Commission meeting on the SDC. There'll be no vote at this meeting from 1 to 6 p.m. Okay, I lost my place. I'm sorry. That was September 15th. The draft response, the draft MAC response must be submitted before this date. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. That's September 15th. September 21st is our next MAC meeting where we're going to review and approve the response letter. And it'll be submitted to Permit Sonoma on the 21st, that date. September 26th is the deadline for the draft EIR response to Permit Sonoma. October 17th is the Permit Sonoma. They will complete their final plan and EIR. October 19th is our October MAC meeting. The 27th, the Planning Commission will vote on final plans and EIR. And on November 8th, the supervisors vote on the final EIR and site-specific plan. And those will go out in an email to everybody, so you don't have to remember them all right now.
All right, thanks, Becky. And Hannah, could that be posted on our MAC webpage? Great. So most important things coming up are the meeting next Wednesday, which I encourage anyone in the public who's interested in SDC should come and listen and comment on the draft environmental impact report. And then you can also submit, and we'll be collecting comments at that meeting to include in our MAC letter. And you can also write directly to us through the county. So go on the county website and find our page, and you can submit comments there. And then we're going to get those in time for the Planning Commission to have those. So that's just what's coming up in the immediate future, because that was a lot of dates. There's a lot happening. All right, thanks, Becky. Hannah, do we have Nick Johnson available?
Yes, we do, and I will promote from it to panelist.
All right, well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Nick Johnson as our special guest today. I don't know Nick super well, but we've had a couple of really interesting conversations in downtown Glen Ellen at the Brick Bridge. And I found out just how much that Nick grew up here and then how much he loves living in Glen Ellen. And he went to Dunbar School. My wife remembers him from Dunbar. So I thought he's somebody, and I'll let him tell more of his story, but he's a young person who left Glen Ellen for a while and then decided to come back, which is fairly unusual these days. So I thought he would be a great person for us to hear from. So Nick, welcome to the MAC meeting. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, there we are. All right.
There you go.
Thanks for having me, everyone. I'll just start off by saying I'm really nobody special. I've lived here all my 30 years. My family has been in Glen Ellen for 1939, so that'd be 83 years. We've been fortunate to call this village our home. And one of the things, well, many of the things that I love about Glen Ellen is, again, it's just been my family's home for, almost nearly 100 years. And I love the fact that I can walk down the streets in the same place where my grandmother and grandfather walked to church, walked to the store, the same streets that my father and uncle grew up on, the same streets that they walked when they got home from overseas. I vowed to stay here for as long as I possibly can. I know there's other places out there. I spent almost a year in Tulsa, Oklahoma for trade school, and I never ever got over how much I missed our mountains, our trees. It's a beautiful place to call home. And I'd like to touch just a little bit on SDC and the future that therein lies. Both my parents worked there. My father was a stationary engineer for almost 40 years, I want to say. I wish he could be here with us with this meeting, but he passed back in 20. Cancer sucks. But personally, I've been speaking with various other members of our community about the future of SDC, and I really think that this would make sense. Let's use it for what it was actually intended for, which was to help those who can't help themselves, which is to help those who need help, just like our veterans, just like my father, my uncle, many other members of my family. I'm certain many members of your families as well. If we could somehow, I don't know how, but use it for what it was intended for, a recovery center for those who gave all, those who gave their limbs, their minds. It would seem good thing to honor them by letting them recover in beautiful Sonoma County, letting them recover at SDC. I know that there's tons of work that has to be done with it. I know it's not easy. I've been keeping tabs on the news and everything else that has been involved with that. But instead of expanding Glen Ellen, I think we should keep it the way it is, but also help those who need it most. And in my opinion, that's our men and women of the armed services of America. I don't want to take up all the time, but that's my 2 cents on it. And I again, really thank you guys for having me on this program here. So I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And I appreciate your being here. And I know it took some doing to get off work a little bit early and, get onto Zoom because it's not something you do a lot. So, I just want to recognize it took some effort and I appreciate it. And I encourage you to come share your thoughts next week at the Triple Mac meeting if you're interested and want to take the time.
Of course.
I just wanted to give people an opportunity to Hannah can send you the link if you're interested.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
I just want to give people a chance to ask any questions. If anyone has a question for Nick. Yeah, Councilmember Angela. Yeah.
Thanks, Arthur. First, I want to ask Hannah. Kate Eagles is trying to get on, Hannah, and she's on by phone as a attendee and not a panelist. Can you help her out? And Nick, I just want to applaud you for coming on as a young person. We so appreciate that you have stayed in our community. And we thank your family for their service in the military to our country. It's really wonderful. And I'm not trying to get your hopes up, but I want to let you know that a good friend of mine has a construction company. And about 4 months ago, he was actually contacted by DGS and he came out. He builds homes for veterans. And they asked him to come out, and he came out and he surveyed the east side and looked over many of the buildings there and gave them some sort of proposal. So I want you to know that that is something that is being looked at least. And that's from personal experience that I had. So just want you to, not give up hope. There may be some things coming down the pipeline. So thank you. Thank you for coming
really-
on today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Any other questions for Nick from council members or not sure if we're allowed to take public comment at this point, but all right. Well, Nick, again, thanks for being here, and you're welcome to stick around for more of the meeting. And I'm sure I'll see you downtown Glen Ellen sometime in the near future.
You certainly will, Arthur. I'll stick around for a little bit, a little longer.
Cool. All right.
Thank
All right.
you,
Thanks
Nick.
again. All right. So are there any corrections or amendments to the July minutes? Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are?
I so move.
And-
Second,
Okay, second. All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand or say aye. All right, unanimously approved by a small quorum. Okay, let's see then. So now we have public comment. So this is a time for the public to speak on any matter of their choosing. Doesn't have to be on the agenda. As far as I know, we haven't received any written public comment up to now.
Through the chairs,
yeah.
sorry to interject. We did receive one written public comment just before the meeting on item number 8, which has been continued. So that was just to acknowledge that we received it. It was from Terry Shore.
Okay, so if Terry's listening, we'll make sure that gets on the agenda, or that'll be available for everybody to hear on when that agenda item comes back around. So we'd like to ask for a show of hands from anyone in the public who would like to speak. And you'll have 2 minutes to say your piece, and there will be a timer. And but 2 minutes is usually enough for people to say what they need. And then once all the public comments have come in, there'll be an opportunity for council members to respond or make comments.
All right, and we do have a few hands raised. So I'll share the timer slide. And just to Councilmember Eagles, I'm working on getting you promoted, but will probably be after the public comment. So I know you're listening, but after we go through this, I'll get you in. All right, so first up is Sonia. You should now be able to unmute.
Welcome, Yesenia, is that right?
Sonia.
Sonia. Oh, Sonia. Oh, hi, Sonia. Okay, yeah, we talked the other day.
Yeah,
Welcome.
hi Arthur. Yeah, and I think I've talked to a couple of you and would definitely love to talk to more of you. My name is Sonia Carabell. I'm with Unite Here, Local 2, which is the hotel workers union for Sonoma County and the North Bay. And from our perspective, Sonoma County's economy has multiple deeply interrelated problems, extreme inequality with many businesses that cater to ultra wealthy tourists while exploiting their largely immigrant workforce, displacement of low-income residents due to skyrocketing rents and housing prices, and increased wildfires caused by global warming, and mounting pressure to develop historically protected open space. The system is not working for anyone, and the Sonoma Developmental Center cannot be more of the same old development that creates profit for the owners at the expense of the community around it. The SDC is an opportunity for a different kind of development, a sustainable development that works to solve the issues that the Sonoma Valley faces. And that's why we think that the SDC project should include community benefits. Community benefits agreements, or CBAs, have been used on a wide variety of projects over the last few decades, especially projects on public land and with major planning approvals. And they legally bind the developer to commitments that the community has prioritized, which can vary from affordable housing to open space preservation to providing a grocery store if it's a food desert, free childcare, living wages for workers, whatever the community feels like they need. And our union, Unite Here, has been involved in negotiating agreements, community benefits agreements in Santa Rosa, Oakland, San Francisco, San Diego, Concord, and more. And for SDC, particularly the residents in the Sonoma Valley could push for whatever feels the most important to them in this project based on their community needs. An example in Santa Rosa I want to touch on really quickly is the Smart Train Railroad Square. RFP included community benefits. I can talk more about that later, or at another time, because I know I'm running out of time. But specifically, I want to suggest that the development agreement should include a requirement the specific plan should include a requirement for a development agreement that addresses community benefits. That's how we can make sure that we have a voice in the future to advocate for this project to meet the residents' needs in the Sonoma Valley and not just be a vehicle for profit. So thank you so much for your time, and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you, Sonia. Yeah, it's an exciting possibility.
The next speaker is Alice. Should be able to unmute.
Welcome, Alice.
Yeah. Let's see. Hello. Thanks. So I just wanted to say that all of those dates, that long list of dates, I have listed them on Eldridge for All. So if you go to eldridgeforall.org and you go to the news flash page at the top, at the top there is important dates for your calendar. And I have all of those different dates, and I have links to either it's the direct Zoom link, or it's the website of the organization, or the calendar of the organization. I've really tried to make it super easy and have it all in one place. So that is there. And then the other thing I wanted to just throw out there, and I know this is in Terry Shore's written comments that she put in, but I am seeing a lot of chatter about the self-mitigating aspect of the EIR. And it looks like there's no mitigations in the summary of the EIR for any environmental impacts. So the question is, does this mean that the specific plan has enough conditions, quote unquote, in it to remove all environmental impacts, so no mitigation is required under CEQA? Everybody's confused about this self-mitigating thing, and that there's no environmental impact. So just wanting to get that question out there on the record, and hoping we can get some detailed answers about that from Permit Sonoma. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alice. And that's a question I'm sure will come up next week.
Next up is Orlando. Orlando, you should be able to unmute.
Welcome,
Hi there.
Orlando.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the clear mandates that give priority to the SDC population in any kind of planning. And there's many people in this population, my son included, that are not being integrated into the general community successfully. And so there is a large portion of the SDC population that's not being integrated, and there's not nearly enough discussion about this mandate that's very clear. And at this point, I do believe that you're in violation of that mandate. So I really want to advocate for the enhanced behavioral support home model to be discussed on the SDC site, as was very clear in that mandate for this population. And I've talked to Brian O about this, and I just really want to keep pushing for this conversation to be very clear and putting that in the forefront, as the mandates were very clear about. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Orlando. And yeah, I invite you to come to the meeting next week. And I'll just say that I think a lot of people in the community share your sentiments, but may not be as closely aware of that whole issue.
And Chair Dawson, just giving folks one more minute. See if they raise their hand. Last call. I see no further hands.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And I don't see Susan up here yet. Has she joined us?
We don't
Where's
have
she
her
going?
on yet. We could reverse the order of the next two items, if that's okay with
Yeah,
you,
let's
Chair
do that.
Dawson.
So let's go ahead and go to Oscar Chavez from the Human Services Department at the county, and he's going to talk about the Portrait of Sonoma County 2021 from the American Rescue Act. And so these are the findings of the Portrait of Sonoma 2021. And then after he speaks, we'll have council member comments and questions, and then we'll go to public comments. Welcome, Oscar.
Glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And so I want to provide an update on the Portrait of Sonoma report, which, as some of you might know, was first published in 2014. And we have an update. I do have some slides that I can share with you. That's okay.
I think so. Yeah, I think you can share your screen.
Let's see. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So before we get started, just want to share some information about our current demographics, which this should be not news to all of you. We know that as of the latest census, about 59% of the population in Sonoma County is white. About 29% of the population is Hispanic, Latinx. 5% two or more races, Asian, 4.5%, and then we have several other populations that are small. Our Black African American population is about 1.5%, American Indian, Alaska Native about 0.6%, 0.6 is other, and about 0.3 in Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. And these smaller populations often don't get the attention that our two dominant communities get. And so, it should be of no surprise to all of you that when we look at Sonoma County, we are graying. Our white population is growing older, and we are browning, meaning that our Hispanic population, which also tends to be much younger. So we have an interesting dynamic where we have an older white population and a much younger Latinx Hispanic population. You'll also notice that these two populations in a lot of our communities are really geographically divided along race and class, meaning that we have a high concentration of affluent white communities and concentration of lower income communities. And that's something that the Portrait of Sonoma highlights. And it's something that we want to talk about to figure out what might we do different to create a more inclusive community here in Sonoma County. So one of the things that we did in 2014 was to start to have a different conversation about what does well-being in Sonoma County look like. Many of you have probably been to the State of the County, where we invite an economist to come and talk about the state of Sonoma County relative to GDP, gross domestic product. The economist usually talks about, our low unemployment rate, the increase in the value of our homes, the different industry sectors, the fact that we have relatively lower poverty, that we have higher incomes than other parts of the state. And while those measures are extremely important, they say nothing about the well-being of people. And so we wanted to think about what does human development look like, and how might we shift our focus away from those traditional metrics to really think about what we can do to improve well-being. So we work with an organization called Measure of America, who developed this Human Development Index. And this is not new. It's been used by the United Nations for many years to really benchmark how countries compare against each other. We are now able to have a human development score for each of the states and now each of the counties here in California. So we're able to get a good picture about human development and how we benchmark against other counties. So with the Human Development Index score, what they do is they look at three primary measures of well-being. They look at a long and healthy life. They look at, access to education. This is formal education, kindergarten participation rates and high school completion rates and college completion rates. And they look at a standard of living primarily focused on median wages. And what they do is they take these three measures and they assign a score to each of the census tracts. Now, when we did this report, there were 99 census tracts. You all know that as a result of redistricting, we now have more census tracts. But the idea here is that by assigning a score to each census tracts, we're able to make comparisons between neighborhoods. And there is a score of 0 to 10. 10 means that the residents living in that census tracts have access to all of the available resources that they need to live a good and healthy life. Things like, ag and open space or open spaces, parks, access to healthy food options, good transportation systems. They're not surrounded by, toxic waste dumps. So all of the things that would contribute to well-being, those neighborhoods with a higher score have more access to those amenities. Neighborhoods with the lower index score lack those opportunities, or these are what we would call communities living furthest away from opportunities. So they tend to be in neighborhoods where you have less investments in school, less home ownership rates, less number of people with college degrees. And so this gives us a good opportunity to make comparisons between different neighborhoods. So when we looked at the difference between the 2014 and the 2021 report, and when we looked at race, this graph tells us that between 2014 and 2021, the Human Development Index declined for Asian and Black communities. Although the Asian community indicators have decreased over this time, they still hold the highest Human Development Index score overall. One of the things that I want to point out is that, using the term Asian is really insufficient category because there's such diversity among the Asian community, and there's a wide range of inequities within the subgroup. But the data, for the Sonoma County is not disaggregated, so we can't really break it up by different Asian communities. At the statewide level, we're able to do that. So we can also see that well-being increased for our Latinx and white residents by almost a full point here. And you may also notice that the Native American and Indigenous and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander populations are not reflected in this comparison. And this is because the algorithm that is used to calculate the Human Development Index requires minimum data to estimate life expectancy, but they were lacking for the populations because of their small sizes. And that's one of the things that we want to figure out, locally. How can we begin to collect better data about, residents whose numbers don't show up in the same quantities as others? And we want to do that through, storytelling and really understanding and hearing from those communities. But what is most interesting is that what we can see from this graph is that our Black community has suffered the greatest decline, and they're facing the gravest realities here in our communities. We can link that to some of the historical and structural racism that existed in our community, some of the laws that have been in place that have disproportionately impacted our African-American communities. So this graph helps us to understand, who is doing better and where we might want to focus more attention. And here in Sonoma County, we can clearly see that we need to further understand the challenges that our Black African-American communities are facing. One of the things that we also want to look at is education by race and how human development differs between the different races here in Sonoma County. So in this slide here, you can see that the Human Development Index score for our African-American community and our Latinx community is significantly lower than our white community in Sonoma County. While Sonoma County does have a higher Human Development Index score than California and a higher Human Development Index score than the United States, within the subgroups, we see pretty significant differences, not just in the Human Index score, but we also see the disparities around, high school not completed, those that have a bachelor's degree, those that have advanced degree, school enrollment, and median incomes. So this also helps us to ask questions around, what might we do different in our community to ensure that we can close the academic achievement gap, particularly for our Latinx students, where we can see that at least 36% of our population is not completing high school, and only about 4.2% or 13% have at least a bachelor degree. And we know that there's a strong correlation between, higher education, greater income leads to greater opportunities for home ownership. And we know that home ownership has been an important vehicle in the United States to accumulate wealth. So if we want to begin to address some of these challenges that are impacting our communities, we have to think about what are those upstream measures or things that we could be doing differently to increase greater opportunities for those that are disproportionately impacted here locally. So, so this is the power of this report, in that it allows us to see differences among race and class relative to educational attainment, earnings, and life expectancy. One of the interesting things is that although the Latinx community has a lower Human Development Index score than our white community, the life expectancy is a lot greater. There's a lot of factors that lead to that. One of the things that we know is that immigrants that come to this country are actually healthier than the general population, but the longer they stay in this country, the worse their health gets. We also know that immigrants who come to this country will come here and work, and when they get older in age, they might go back to their country of origin. So we don't capture, when they die. So that might also impact the number. There's also another factor about that intergenerational living, where there's greater connectedness between the Latinx community. It's called the Latino health paradox because we really don't know all of the factors, but we know that there's a lot of things that influence the fact that our Latinx community lives longer than our other populations, or even more so than our Asian community, not by much. So now I want to touch a little bit about, now that you know the Human Development Index score, I want to talk about the impact of COVID. We know, and this report doesn't speak to the impacts of COVID because it's looking at data prior to the pandemic. So the last data set that we looked at was 2019. But what we can see from this slide here is that there were some, if we want to compare the percentage of cases to the percentage of the population, we can see that our Hispanic Latinx community makes up 27% of the population, but it accounts for 45% of all the COVID cases. So there's a disproportionality in the rate. This has been widely published. This is, should be of no surprise to any of you. And we can see that the Black community comprises 1.3% of Sonoma County population, but accounts for 2% of the COVID cases. And so who was hardest hit by the pandemic has primarily been our communities of color. One of the interesting things that we did was we overlaid the infection rates and death rates on a map. And those happen to be also primarily where we see the lower rates of human development. And that should be of no surprise, because we know that, who was impacted were our essential workers, were our lower income household, who tended to live, in multi-generational households, who did not have the opportunity to isolate in a different room, or who had to work. And so we begin to see the impact of the structures that we have in place and how they impacted our community members. One of the things that a demographer talked about, he said that, his name's Dr. Manuel Pastor, he said that COVID was the disease that revealed the illness of our society, meaning that a lot of the structures that were in place prior to the pandemic, further created the conditions to have more death amongst our communities of color. So we know that, we have a safety net system, but it's not robust enough. And we're not prepared to fully support our community, particularly our vulnerable and our lower income members of our community. So again, this is very important data for us to be looking at so that when we can think about the kinds of investments that we could make, we can point to what were those structural impediments that further hindered different community members. One of the things that we also use this portrait data for is to make comparisons and look at which parts of our county have higher Human Development Index scores. Again, this is probably of no surprise to all of you. When we look at the data from the census data, we can see that the neighborhood with the highest Human Development Index score is East Bennett Valley, and the lowest neighborhoods tend to be in Roseland, Comstock area, Bicentennial Park, Rohnert Park, BC in our section. Now, Rohnert Park is a bit of an outlier. There is a high concentration of students that drives down the income. They're not generally working, so we're working to better refine some of that data. But East Bennett Valley in 2014 was also the highest census tract. And so what we want to do is, ask questions. How is it that, Roseland and East Bennett Valley are just 2 miles apart, but they live in completely different worlds? And what kind of investments could, leaders make to help drive up human development in the Roseland community? And there has been some slight improvement. We can point to the fact, actually, it's gone up by a few points. And there's been several things that have happened in that neighborhood. The most obvious one has been the annexation of Roseland into the city of Santa Rosa. There's been investments in more charter schools, more schools. The junior college has opened up a campus. There's been more economic development in the Roseland community. There's been an increase in the affordable housing in that community. So there's been a lot more entrepreneurial type of growth within that community. And there continues to be additional investment. So these are the kinds of things that we would point to that can help drive human development. It's important because a community like Sonoma Valley or Cloverdale or Windsor could then look at this information and say, what might drive human development in neighborhoods where we see vast differences in opportunity? So this becomes a very powerful tool, not only for city leaders, philanthropists, business community members, but also residents to really understand the conditions and the lack of opportunity that exists within their neighborhoods. So what we know from this baseline data is that our lowest census tracts tend to be in Roseland, Comstock, Bicentennial, and I mentioned Rohnert Park, and that the Human Development Index declined most significantly for our Black community here in Sonoma County. We also recognize that the data that was used is, it's census data that doesn't capture sub-county level data. So there are limitations to the data. And so one of the things that we in the county are doing is trying to build that data infrastructure to capture more granular information about different groups in our community. Specifically, we don't have information about our LGBT community or other marginalized communities. We lack information about our indigenous community. So we want to build the kind of infrastructure to be able to collect and gather that kind of information. There's also a lack of recognition of informal knowledge transfer. I mentioned that the Human Development Index score was based on access to formal education, yet we know that in many communities, information and knowledge is transferred orally from one generation to another. And when we look at the income, the Human Development Index only measures median income. It doesn't capture wealth. And we know that there are vast differences in wealth between races. And we can see that, back in the 30s and 40s, if you were a person of color, you could not buy a home if you were not Caucasian. And even in our own community, we had things like race restricted covenants that was written into the deeds that said, a person not of Caucasian race cannot buy, live, or own this property. And over time, by excluding other communities, you began to see the accumulation of wealth between certain groups, and the divestment of wealth in other neighborhoods, in other community, for other races. And so that's the legacy. Those are the structures that have created these vast differences that we now have to reconcile and figure out how we move forward. So these are the things that we're also trying to figure out. So one of the things that we want to do is to develop an agenda for action. And the way we want to do that is we want to involve those neighborhoods where we see the greatest disparities and who are living furthest away from opportunity, to help inform and to drive the kind of change that they think would be necessary for us to begin to drive up human development. So over the next couple of months, we're going to be doing some data walks. We're going to be engaging residents. We're going to be asking them, what are the things that they would like to see to help improve the conditions in their neighborhoods. And that agenda for action will then be available to those that are in positions to affect change: our county board of supervisors, city council members, philanthropists, the business community, community residents who might want to organize around some of these issues. And so, while we're only focusing on these 4 neighborhoods, this process could be used by any other community group. And we hope that once we're done with the development of the agenda for action, that we might provide some technical assistance, some resource, some additional data support to other parts of our county who want to take a deep dive and look at differences within their own communities. So again, this is the process that we're going to be using. There is an organization that was part of the county called Health Action that is now in the process of becoming its own 501c3, and they will be driving this work over the next couple of years. And the goal is that in 5 years, we can come back and revisit this and to say, what investments were made that resulted in changed conditions or improved conditions for certain parts of our community. So this is a very important and powerful tool that invites people to come up with solutions to address some of these very persistent and pesky problems that, have been very difficult for us to grapple with. And finally, it's important to note that the inequalities that exist today are not natural or inevitable, nor are they product of chance. They are the result of decisions made by people in power. And because of that, we know that we can make different decisions, and we can actually invest and advance policies and solutions that can create fair outcomes, particularly for those living furthest away from opportunity. So that concludes the presentation. And I wanted to provide a little update on the American Rescue Act plan. But here are some links for additional information where you can actually get a copy of the report. You can read it. You can look at the Human Development Index score for your census tract where you live. And we're going to be publishing, stories and updates to keep our community engaged about the work that we're doing to help improve well-being across our entire community. So I'm going to stop the screen share and answer any questions you might have specific to the report before I touch briefly on the American Rescue Plan Act.
Thank you, Oscar. That was a really interesting presentation and just a real illuminating on how things, I think a lot of us have a sense of, but you've got some real data to show what's going on here. Anyone have any comments or questions for Oscar? Yeah, Councilmember Handren.
Hi, Oscar. Thanks. That's really, really interesting presentation. On the map, it looks like the Springs also had the Springs census tract also had a relatively low human development number. Do you happen to know how that number correlates with the Roseland numbers?
It is in that lower range, right? And so one of the things that if you look at the town of Sonoma and the Springs, you see vast differences there. And I think that would be a good case study for the Sonoma Valley community to take a deep dive. I mean, so much of that community has been studied. The challenges. And so I like to say, we love to admire the problem, but we don't spend enough time in the solution space. And listen, the solutions are going to be very difficult because they're political. They're about trying to find common ground between the interests of very diverse communities who have very different worldviews. But if we don't do that, we know that we're going to continue to see that divide grow. And so I think it is in our collective best interest to try to figure this out because our fates are tied. We can't export Sonoma County. So we better figure out how can we be more inclusive.
And just a follow up to that, it seems like the common denominator in those areas, the Springs and the Roseland areas, those low numbers tend to be primarily neighborhoods of color. Do you have any information about legal status of those residents, whether they're documented or undocumented, and how that contributes to inequities?
Well, absolutely. We don't have a good system of tracking status because we just don't, and a lot of people are reluctant to share that information. But the last estimate from a number of years ago had a number that there's about 20,000 undocumented residents in our community, primarily working in the hospitality, tourism, and agricultural industry. And we also know from COVID that there was a lot of our undocumented community who did not have access to any resources because, historically, we've not provided services to undocumented residents. Our department, Human Services, unless you are a legal resident, with few exceptions, you're not entitled to services. So that further created challenges for our undocumented communities. And now we're getting anecdotal information. We're getting a clearer picture about ways in which we can further support them because they're here. They're the underpinning of so many sectors of our economy.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Yeah, Councilmember Dickey.
Oscar, thank you. Really, really interesting. So first of all, Hannah, is it possible for those links that he had up on his shared screen at the end be shared with us so we could go to them? I couldn't write them down, but I would be really interested in reading further. So somehow could those be shared with us?
Yes, and Oscar, I'll reach out to ask for your slides, see if I can.
Yes, I'll also send you the
Great.
copies of the slide.
Thank you.
And Oscar, I have a question that's a little complex, but I'll try and make it as simple as possible. Privacy makes these sorts of this sort of data collection so difficult. And so I'm wondering, how do you overcome that when you're trying to accumulate this sort of information? Whether it's percentages of race or, the discussions about education and that sort of thing. I mean, what percentage of the population responds to your inquiries, for instance? Does it feel as though you're compromised when you try to accumulate this information by the lack of response, or do you get good response? I'm sort of curious about that aspect of it.
That is an excellent question, and it is a problem we're currently grappling with. What the portrait revealed was the fact that we didn't have sufficient data, or the data was inadequate to tell the story about certain groups. With the American Rescue Plan Act, we are collecting that kind of race ethnicity data, but we are getting concerns from our nonprofit partners about sharing that kind of information with government because of, the way that government honestly in the past has misused some of that
Yeah.
data. And we know that there's concern, during the prior administration around public charge, the fear that if you access public benefits, you would not be eligible to apply for permanent legal status. So that concern is real. And so we're trying to figure it out is the best answer that I can provide you. I think it's a twofold thing. I think we in government have to do a better job about letting residents know the kinds of information that can or will not be shared. There are HIPAA laws. There's things that can't be shared, but it's not a guarantee. We also want to work with our community-based organizations to talk to them about the ways in which we will use that information and that data and have more transparency. If we don't do that, we won't get the buy-in from residents. But as of today, it is a challenge. We've never been able to do this. And our hope was to be able to capture this information, to be able to understand what has been the impact of the investments that we're making on certain populations or in certain neighborhoods. And absent being able to capture that information, we won't be able to tell a really good, compelling story about what is working or where we should be making investments. But we haven't figured it out. We are right in the midst of it. And our first approach is we've got to have conversation and we've got to not make this an academic exercise, but really understand the why of why collecting this data is so important.
Well, I think, obviously the populations that we're trying to accumulate the data from have trust issues.
Yeah.
And I would think that would be the greatest obstacle to overcome, honestly. I mean, the white population probably is more responsive because they feel more confidently about, their position in life, their position within the power structure of the county,
Yes.
or even the nation at large. So I have a lot of empathy for that. I mean, it's got to be a really hard job to make that association of data to a population that doesn't trust, what's going to happen when they're transparent about their issues. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And we are convening a nonprofit stakeholder group, and we're going to work with them to help us develop some talking points to engage the very people whose data we want to collect. But there's no question, we can't get beyond the trust issue and government. We've got to figure out whether we do this through a third party, but we can't give up on the important and the need to collect better data to better direct our investments to those communities that need it the most. So really quickly, I know I've taken up a lot of time. I just want to transition. So, with the American Rescue Plan Act, we really have a once in a lifetime opportunity where the county dedicated nearly $40 million to a community resiliency grants program specifically designed to address those who were hardest hit by the pandemic. And so we engaged in a very robust engagement process. We had community meetings in each of the supervisorial districts. We had surveys to our nonprofits asking them, how is the people that you serve being impacted by COVID? We went to residents and asked them how they were being impacted. We looked at data. We had various different reports because we wanted to get as much information about how might we better invest these dollars. And we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to track how these investments were being utilized in our community. So through this robust process, the Board of Supervisors asked us to prioritize these dollars going to those organizations that were hardest hit by the pandemic and to those communities that were hardest hit. So a lot of these dollars were not invested in like the traditional infrastructure that wasn't allowable using ARPA. And so through this through this process, we identified 9 categories. They included, assistance to essential workers, investments in childcare and childcare facilities, investments in culturally responsive disaster response, because we know we have a lot of work to do in that area. We looked at investments in educational disparities because we can see the huge gaps. We also recognize that a lot of our families and individuals needed emergency financial assistance. So there's dollars to support that. Food assistance has been a big issue, and I'm sure Supervisor Gorin will talk about that. And, she championed our department to do an assessment of the food gaps in the county. And we also funded housing and shelter, in addition to mental health. Mental health was probably the largest category, and support for our small businesses. So these 27 organizations received nearly $40 million between now and December 31st of 2024. We're using something called results-based accountability to track how these dollars are being utilized in our community. And basically what that means is it's a simple way of understanding how these dollars work. We want to know, how much did we do? How many people did we help? How well did we do it, right? And we can do that through surveys and was it an evidence-based practice? And at the end of this ARPA, is anybody better off? So we're collecting data on a quarterly basis. We'll be reporting to the public and to the board in real time, something that we've not been able to do. And then we're using this as a learning laboratory to understand, what happens when you invest $40 million in your community, and how might that learning be used to inform other future investments or change a practice in our community for how we work better together. We have never seen the kind of collaboration between organizations. One of the groups is working with 18 different organizations to coordinate services across our community. So we're going to learn a lot. We're tracking a lot of our progress. And again, we hope that at the end of this ARPA investment, we'll be able to tell a compelling story about who was helped, where the dollars go, and most importantly, are people better off as a result of this investment? So I will include links to that information, to the organizations that were funded. I'll provide that to Hannah so that she can share that with you. So any questions related to the ARPA funding?
Thanks, Oscar. I just want to throw in, we'll take questions from council members, and then we'll move to public comment after that. So any council member questions or comments? All right. So now's an opportunity for public comment. So please raise your hand, and Hannah will promote you.
All right. Our first commenter is Tracy. Tracy, you should be able to unmute.
Welcome, Tracy.
Hi, I just want to thank the presenter for what he presented and for the information he presented. One of the things that strikes me, I work at a local school that's primarily, the population is primarily Latinx and second language learners. And I've also been working on SDC, so I've been involved in the affordable housing conversation. And I just want to say that data is cool, and data means a lot to people who like data. But for the people that you're trying to help, data doesn't matter, right? What matters is what goes into their pockets. What matters is it doesn't even matter what goes in their pocket. You talk about wealth, but it's more about their quality of life and their ability to be happy. And you're trying to get at that, which I commend you for. I don't know how to help, except that with the storytelling, you might be able to, I don't know, maybe reach more of these folks. If you can tell stories about how somebody who actually took the risk of talking to someone who's trying to collect data actually got something that they needed to make their lives better. Because right now, it's just, it's data and it's reports and it's things that are completely intangible, even to white people. So it's a comment. I hope it helps. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. And other public comments?
I'm giving our attendees just a few more moments to raise their hand. And I'm seeing no further hands.
All right. Well, thank you, Oscar. Any final comments from you, or?
No, I think the commenter had a good point. There's an old saying that says, data without stories is just data, and stories without data is just stories. And so part of filling in the gap is to be able to go and talk to our community and lift up those voices. And we got to make it real. And I think, we said this is going to be community led. So we want to go into the neighborhood and have them tell us, what are the things that could be improved, and we're not just going to extract that knowledge, but we're going to compensate them for sharing that information and report back on the feedback that they've given us. It's something that we don't do very well, but we're building the infrastructure to create those feedback loops to not only go out and get information, but to go back and report out to the community. This is what you told us, and as a result of what you told us, this is what we're going to do differently. So I hope to engage you in this process as we move along, and if I can be of any service with any information from our department or from this effort, please count on me.
All right, thank you, Oscar, and thanks for all your good work. And yeah, if you need anything in this area, please reach out to us, and we'll help you in whatever way we can.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, this is a largely white, wealthy community, but we do have pockets of folks in other situations, and I know it's part of my desire, and I think of most people in this area to be more inclusive. So we're looking for ways to do that. So any suggestions you have down the road, let us know.
Great. No, thank you, and again, thank you for the invitation.
All right, have a good evening.
Thank you.
And now our long awaited for supervisor. Welcome, Susan. Glad you could make it.
Well, great. I cooked salmon chowder today for dinner. It was lovely. So I was just taking a moment to enjoy the chowder with my husband. So a few minutes late, I apologize.
Right.
And I know that Oscar has left, but I really want to sing Oscar's praises. He's been such a help to me in Sonoma Valley. Often I've outreached to him about emerging issues in Sonoma Valley in the Latinx community and the various service providers. And he's been Johnny on the spot, reaching out, trying to look at the big picture. And so I'm so grateful that Oscar is with us. Since I missed part of his presentation, I'm not sure that he talked about the food distribution. We allocated funding in the budget process and finally found a home for discussion regarding this with Human Services and Oscar in particular. I've been, every time there's an RFP or an award through ARPA or any other funding for food, I always check to say, okay, so they funded this organization, none of them in Sonoma Valley. So how does that food actually become available in Sonoma Valley? Well, Ceres provides a few meals here. Food for Thought provides a few meals here. We did connect Food for All and Farm to Table with fresh produce, but it was like banging your head against the wall because I didn't think the county really understood the valley and the organizations that are already involved in food distribution. So I just sent Oscar an email today saying, okay, we're going to convene a group of organizations to help you understand exactly what they do, how they provide food for the county, and why they are not part of the larger distribution that the county often has created. So hopefully, and I think that the city has hired Kathy Capriola to actually do some of the background for that. So I'm anxious to have a more complete understanding and involvement of food distribution in Sonoma Valley. So that's, it's like part of my function is connecting the resources in the central core to the needs in Sonoma Valley. And I would say I give me a C in that regard, not for lack of trying though. I'm still trying. So each opportunity, I keep having this conversation. The county is moving forward with potentially negotiating with the property owner to lease a building, potentially with an option to buy, to locate health and human services, maybe probation, maybe some other county functions. And I know that there are a variety of community organizations that would love to have an opportunity to co-lease the other part of the building to create a community hub there. I think there's a real opportunity to have that intersection between county services and community services. So hope springs eternal. I haven't given it up. I've been working on this for 6 years, so I just keep working on it. But to find a building that would meet our needs has been truly the linchpin of the discussions and generating conversation, as well as the conversation about support or lack thereof for moving the county center downtown. Linda was pretty clear in putting the kibosh on that, said, you know, my constituents really don't care where the county has a home because we don't go to the county, wherever it is. And we want a service center in Guerneville to provide that interface with our constituents. They've actually had leasing of a number of functions at an existing building, and we did approve purchase of, I think it's the Bank of America building in Guerneville. Again, West County Community Services leases half of the building. The county would lease half of the building. So it's the same configuration and coming together of the county and community that I think would be really beneficial for all of Sonoma Valley. And my report is exactly that, because yay, we did not have a board meeting this week and for good behavior, and we're not having a board meeting for good behavior next week, but August 30th is going to be a humdinger of a board meeting. It's the Ag Pass program. It's the lease presentation on the local coastal plan. And I know, Angela, you may be interested in that because I think you live in the ocean, but it's a little far removed for most of us. So I haven't even dived down into it. And there are a couple of other pithy issues that are coming forward on August 30th. So stay tuned. It's happening. I just sent out sent out my e-newsletter, and I really reported on some interesting things that happened at NACO, National Association of Counties Conference. And of course, the election of James Gore, probably less important to this crowd than it is to James Gore, but some of the policy committees that I've been involved in. And I hope you get the district newsletter, because Sonoma County Tourism is sending out a tourism survey, and you can click on the links in Spanish or English. We were maybe a little hard on them yesterday when we met as a team, saying, we're not exactly fans of tourism in Sonoma Valley, even though we depend on certainly the economic vibrancy and generation in Sonoma Valley. So I haven't even gone on there, but I encourage you to click on the link and see what questions they're asking. How do we attract the folks who will make a difference, who will add benefit to Sonoma County as a whole, who will be good stewards, who will embrace environmental attitudes and attributes that we have. So there are a number of things going on, and thank you for all that you do. It's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Susan. And anyone have any comments or questions for Susan? I'll just say one thing about the tourism issue. It seems like there's a up to a certain point, tourism can really benefit a community, and then once it gets beyond a certain point, it starts to detract. And a pet peeve of mine is that like the Visitors Bureau gets all this TOT money to attract more visitors, which bring in more TOT money, which gives the Visitors Bureau more money to do more advertising. A couple of years ago, I did a little research on sort of how other counties are set up, and it seems like most are set up so that the TOT money actually mitigates the impact of tourism rather than encourages more tourism. So just a thought on that. I'm sure the Visitors Bureau would not want to hear me say that, but that's my own personal thought.
Well, we have to remember that Sonoma County Tourism does have a revenue funded through the business improvement area that was set up a while ago. And so they have a slightly different focus than Sonoma Valley Tourism. And Sonoma Valley Tourism is funded through some of the same mechanisms, but at a much lower level, as well as the chambers of commerce, which have some value for us. So we're still in the process of trying to figure out a more sustainable funding source for that might speak to the point that you just made. But please know that I have two small sources of discretionary funding coming from TOT that's proportional to that raised in the district. And of course, our community investment funds, that's the fund that we support many nonprofits and service providers with small amounts of money to offset their operation and their advertising. And then we do have a source for tourism impact funds. And we really see that, well, that funds the operation of both MACs, the note takers and the translators and the rent if we come back to meeting in person. And it's the source of funds from which I contribute larger amounts, like I did a sizable amount, $10,000 to $20,000 for the Sonoma Valley Collaborative to fund their efforts on housing, and funded a larger amount for this face-to-face mobile van and the Pest Lifeline van. And so looking at the $10,000 to $15,000 range to really support larger efforts in Sonoma Valley. And I use that to fund Food for All and a couple of other food providers in the last couple of years. So we use that potentially to offset some of the tourism.
Okay, and my impression may be a little bit dated. That was from a few years ago. Maybe it sounds like maybe it's improved.
Maybe.
I take a look at it, yeah. No.
And Matt says, no, it hasn't been.
All right, well. Any other comments or questions from council members before we move to public? All right, any members of the public who would like to comment or have questions for Supervisor Gorin?
Oh, good. Let's keep the meeting short.
I'm just giving folks a few more seconds, opportunity to raise your hand. And last call, I see no hands.
All right, well, thank you, Supervisor Gorin.
And Chair Dawson, if you don't mind, for folks who have joined the meeting late, can we update them on the items that are continued to a later date?
Oh, right. Yeah. So item number 7, the Sonoma County Transit bike racks and benches, and the Sonoma Developmental Center update from the Land Trust is also being postponed to a later date. Both the presenters were not available. So, but we will certainly be getting into SDC next week at the, we call it the Triple MAC. It's the, includes the Citizens Advisory Council. So they're not exactly a MAC, but it's an easy way to say it. All right, so now we're at item number 9, reports and announcements from council members and ad hocs. And so Vice Chair Handren is going to talk about the scope of the community projects ad hoc committee.
Yeah, thank you. So I spoke a little bit about this at our last meeting, that Mark and I in the ad hoc committee have, through conversations with other groups, decided that it might be a good idea to develop a kind of a master plan and of community projects that people are interested in. But that sounds like a really big job that's probably going to outlast our ad hoc. So with that being our ultimate goal, what we really want to do is meet with local community groups and try and start that process. And we were just looking for some feedback from the Greater Mac on that direction and whether it's the right way to go, if any tips on how to go about it, things like that, and just get some buy-in, because we were initially started really with the idea of developing or organizing a sign, kind of a welcome community sign. And I think that project, Mark, who's not here tonight, could speak better about it, but I think that the Glen Ellen Forum is really working on developing that sign, and they recently had a meeting that I wasn't able to attend that Mark would have more information about where they are in the status of that project. And so because we were specifically formed kind of around that sign project, we wanted to report back that we want to work collaboratively with other groups, and that does seem to be something that the Glen Ellen Forum has taken the lead on. And we just wanted to get buy-in from the rest of the group on the direction that we're looking at going.
Comments or questions for Vicki? Yes, Councilmember Oldroyd.
This endeavor for Glen Ellen, or does it include Kenwood?
No, it includes Kenwood too. We wanted to reach out to the Rotary Group in Kenwood and other Kenwood organizations to represent their interests as well.
Thank you. I think the Kenwood Press is a good source of information for these.
Thank you.
Vicki, would you mind just restating succinctly what your question is?
Yeah, so we were kind of formed around that sign, and we don't want to abdicate our duty, because that was something that was specifically assigned to us. But on the other hand, we don't want to interfere with the process that's already happening with another local group. So we just want to report back that we're not moving forward with leading the sign effort at this point, because the Glen Ellen Forum is doing that. And what we decided to do in the alternative is trying to develop some sort of a master plan of projects that the community wants to see. And because we are not doing what we were specifically formed to do, we just want to report back and make sure that that is something that the Greater Mac agrees to.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought basically, do you want to have a straw vote and just, I would personally support your approach. Does anybody disagree with what the ad hoc committee is doing or have another take on it? Okay. I think, Hannah, do we wait for all the committee reports before public comment?
Yeah, I would suggest that.
So I'll just give a very brief report on something that happened, which I haven't shared yet with my other transportation committee members, which is Susan Oldroyd, and who else is on that? I apologize. It's been a while since we've met. Jed Cooper. So one thing that happened in the last couple of weeks is I had a meeting with Mia Kong, who's working under the infill builders on a proposal for SDC, and so I shared with her the bike path idea, sent her some text on it and the map, and she was excited about it. So that was I was pleased to see that she was really on board with that, and she's very much into. Some of you may have seen this. She sent me a newspaper article about a project that she worked on that combined like workforce housing with alternative transit on state land. So it had I haven't read it in detail, but it had a bike path connected with it, and it was workforce / affordable housing. So she's got experience in these kinds of things.
I had asked Hannah when we were attending the fair luncheon, if we could get an update on the bike path in general as a global valley thing, but in particular, then looking at the details too. So I'm asking Hannah again if we can have that.
Yeah, I was planning to bring that to the chair and vice chair in our next agenda review. So for a future meeting.
And maybe we'll actually have the bike rack and benches presentation. That would sort of go along with that too. And let's see, any other ad hoc reports? All right, any public comments on the ad hoc report outs? Or questions?
And for the public, if anyone like to make a comment, go ahead and raise your hand in Zoom. And seeing no hands.
All right, so we're moving on to the last item, which is consideration of items for a future agenda. Yeah, Councilmember Morgan.
Hi, Arthur. I wonder if I could just make a really quick announcement. Is that appropriate to do right now?
Sure. Yeah, I should have asked for
Oh, that's okay.
announcements. Yeah.
I know many of us know Julie Atwood and what an amazing community member she is. They are sponsoring the Home and Ranch Readiness Neighborhood Workshop. They've already done one, and there's a second one on August 23rd. It will be at her Atwood Ranch barn from 6 to 8, and it's a wonderful workshop on readiness, safety, neighbors and animals, what to do. There'll be all kinds of experts there. So, what to do during and after a disaster. So if anybody is interested in that, or you know someone that's interested in that, I think you can go to the Halter Project and find out more about that. It's just a wonderful thing to be a part of, and it'll be next Tuesday, 6 to 8.
All right, thank you. I have a question for Councilmember Dickey for the meeting next week. I think Hannah mentioned to me that you can only represent either the CAC or the North Sonoma Valley MAC, and I was just curious if that might affect our planning a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, we're talking about pretty unique circumstances. So I think that'd probably be a question for Hannah and Ariel, to be honest. I'm not certain. I guess I could put two heads on my shoulders.
You're definitely worth that much.
I think
I could make one of them younger.
We request Matt on our team.
Yeah, we'll take them. Yeah.
I will check back with Ariel and we'll circle back with you too.
Okay, thanks. So items for a future agenda. So just to state this at the outset, is our next meeting, we will be finalizing our MAC response letter for the EIR. And if we're lucky, that won't take a huge amount of time, but I think there's no guarantees. I mean, we can take ideas for future agendas. I just can't guarantee they're going to happen next month. Yeah, Matt.
So we have an ad hoc committee for that purpose. Is your proposal that we would put together some ideas collectively, and then our ad hoc would then compose it into a document?
Yeah, I've been in communication with Kate Eagles. I haven't looped you in because of the Brown Act, but I was. I think this was an email, but maybe not. But anyway, the plan is for us to collect public comments at the meeting next week, and then Kate's on board to draft a letter using those comments, and also using input from council members who are going to sign up for specific topics. And so she's going to have the letter drafted in time to submit to the Planning Commission. And on the 15th, I checked in with Ariel and Hannah, and they said it was okay to submit a draft letter, as long as it's as long as it's been posted on our website before the 15th, then it's public information, and then it can go to the Planning Commission. So ideally, that's what happens. So Kate's been traveling a lot, so I would guess she's probably going to contact you soon and talk about strategizing for how to pull that off. But my hope is kind of working from the, I'm trying to get any discussion here, but working from the template of the NOP letter to make the comments to
Right.
Sonoma.
Right. I bet if we just excoriate them and do it bluntly and leave it at that.
I'm with you.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I'm on I'm on the committee with Matt and Kate, and I think Kate mentioned that we need to somehow incorporate, we'll wait till the meeting on Wednesday and make sure that we include the public comments or get some idea of what the public is looking at too.
Yeah, that's the
Along-
plan. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also invite the public to contact us through the county with any comments they have that we can incorporate into the letter.
So along those lines, question for Hannah. Hannah, how soon are the minutes available for any given meeting? If we have our meeting next week, how soon would the minutes from that meeting be available to us?
There's a separate minute taker who takes the meetings for the SVCC.
Yeah,
So,
understood.
yeah, so I'm not certain because I'm not that admin what their turnaround time, but it looks like Chair Dawson might know.
Well, I don't know about that specifically, but I know Kate is planning to take good notes at the meeting. And so she's going to try to capture, the gist of all the public comments.
Okay.
I will check with, I'll check with
That's a
Ariel.
big
What
task. Yeah.
I will back her up on that. I'm a pretty good note taker, and I'll try to be very comprehensive along with her.
Okay. All right.
And as an additional resource, the meeting recordings are usually up within a couple days on Supervisor Gorin's YouTube. So the recorded version of the meeting.
So I know you can't speak to the CAC part. How about the MAC part? How soon are those minutes available as an example, for instance?
So our minute taker, Barbara, usually gets them to me not the Friday after the meeting, but the following Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Any other ideas for future agendas from the council members? Any ideas from the public that they would like us to consider?
Giving folks a minute to raise their hands and seeing none.
All right, I think we're there. Amazing. So do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Seconded.
All right, I think that was maybe thirded and fourth. Are we all in favor of adjourning the meeting? Raise your hand or say aye. All right, unanimously adjourned. So we'll see most of you next Wednesday. I know Susan Oldroyd won't make it, but we'll work with that. And we'll be in touch by email in the next couple of days to get our strategy ironed out within the constraints of the Brown Act. I'll put it that way.
Thank you, Arthur.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks, Arthur and Supervisor Gorin.
Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah. Thank you.